have Dr. Heather Bennett with us. She's a Director of Equity Services at Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Thank you for being with us. So can you, how long have you been doing this?
I feel like I've been doing it forever. I've been doing it for about 4 years.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So you've got your feet wet a little bit, huh?
Just a little bit.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
So I know that some of the things that people are interested here at CUBE, which we can see it's a little bit loud, is building an equity strategy for the school district. So can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Well, it's really important that when we think about equity as a whole, that it's not just programs and practices that we develop in isolated ways. That districts need to create a strategy for equity that's going to make sense for their school district, and that's going to build capacity over time. And so one of the things that is so hard is that when you have a narrative of most institutions and systems, like schools, it's based in exclusion. And a lot of times there's a historical narrative of exclusion in various different ways. And so in order for you to have a construct of inclusion, you have to build capacity for that work. You have to develop a strategy that's going to take away that narrative, that historical narrative that has harmed students, specifically marginalized students in the past. And so it's really important that when we're thinking about a strategy for equity, that we understand what it is, why it's important, and of course how to practice it. And that practice has to be built into the systems of a district. I'm talking about data, professional development, curriculum, family and community engagement, multiplicity of HR services, extracurricular activities, the role of the school board's work, administration, teacher development. It has to be built into the very systems and structures of a district. And so
it has to permeate the entire
the entire community. It can't just be isolated to one item. At PSBA, or Pennsylvania School Boards Association, we always say there's a continuum to this work. We have equity as a misunderstanding, equity as a topic, equity as a recommendation, and equity as the foundation. And equity as the foundation is where we're trying to get to. And that means that equity subsists as the foundation that lifts up school board service, that lifts up administration, management of the work, that lifts up teacher and staff development, that lifts up family and community engagement, that lifts up HR, budgets, community partnerships, curriculum, that lifts up all the different aspects so that it reaches students. And so when we talk about districts can't just say we want to do this equity work, you have to really have
sounds easy.
It's so great. You have to really have a plan in place. And so one thing about my job at PSBA is we work with almost 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. We have over 45 school board directors that we support. And so it's been a blessing and an honor to be able to help districts think about how to create an equity strategy that's going to build capacity for this work and really create a narrative of change.
Right, so that policy with an equity lens is what you're after, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really small job, right?
Policies is really the work of school boards. School board directors, their whole thing is about policy. They're not in the management stage. That's the administration, that's the superintendent. But school board directors, they have the power of developing the mission and vision of the district. They have the power to develop policy that's going to move equity forward in the district and develop that foundation. But it takes time to get there, right?
Yes, it does.
Especially if the district doesn't know, or the board directors don't even know what equity is. And so we always say, when we're thinking about developing policies, you have to review your policies with an equity lens. And you have to understand what equity is. So I'll just define what equity is. It's pretty much the just and fair distribution of resources based upon the unique context of students, right? So giving students what they need is what equity is. It seems very simple, but in practice is a whole nother element. And so it's important to understand what we think are characteristics of equity. It has to be inclusive. It has to make sure that we are including the voices and embedding the voices of different peoples and communities into the education decision-making process. We're constantly always talking to the same people over and over again, and it's usually the people who have the social capital to access the district. What we really need to do is making sure we're listening to, we're inviting the different voices of the community, specifically those who've experienced marginalization, isolation,
So traditional has been from the top down, and you got to start it from the bottom up, right? It's a grassroots effort.
Absolutely. You got to know your demographics, and you have to listen to students. How are we supposed to develop a whole program, a whole system of change, if we're not asking the students what they need? So inclusivity is important. It has to be fair. And fairness is meeting people where they are, giving them what they need to fully access the educational space and opportunity. And so that's saying that some students are going to need this, other students are going to need that, other students are going to need this. If you have more than one kid and you have one child who's interested in like ballet and you have another kid who's interested in baseball, you're not going to give the kid who's interested in baseball ballet shoes.
Absolutely.
Okay?
That'd be tough.
They'll be like, what'd you do? Like, this is not what I asked for. You don't know who I am. I do not feel like that I belong. And when we say this in terms of different demographic shifts that are happening in our district, making sure specifically thinking about students of color, ELL students, students with special needs or an IEP, students who are coming in from other countries, we have to make sure that our curriculum, our work, our leadership styles and practices are meeting the needs of those different students so that they're all going to be successful in our district. And that means we have to really think about how we're distributing resources and what resources we're giving them so that they can be successful in our schools.
It sounds like you almost need a playbook or a rule book, maybe, I guess, formal training for school boards, right?
Absolutely. And the one last thing I will say in that definition is justice. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things our boards struggle with. Justice is making sure that we're understanding and we're addressing the past as well as the present harms done by the system. And for board directors, it's extremely important that they're getting training on what that is and what that looks like. School districts have a sense of thinking like, I'm always, like, we're the best, and here's why. And here's the thing, I think boards and districts need to do a better job of branding the successes of them and not just the hard stuff. But I think boards need to be really reflective that not everyone has been successful in your district and why that's the case. So for all of this to work, especially if you're trying to get to policy changes, which changes the narrative of the district, you have to have training for the board.
You've got to isolate the problem, right, or the issue, and recognize it.
You have to recognize it and then address why it's important to change, right? And so at PSBA, one thing we've done, we have a whole workshop training series. We start off with, what is equity? Why is equity important? What is your personal why to this? What is also the district why? Our mission and vision usually has, in school districts, usually have something about all children will, all children should. In order to address the all, you have to address the some. You have to understand the issues and concerns of every single student in your district. So it's important to understand your why equity. Another piece of it is understanding, of course, dismantling and barriers to equity. What is implicit bias? What is privilege? What does those things mean to our work? But understanding what culturally responsive school leadership means for them. What does it mean to be a culturally responsive leader? So we always think about culturally responsive as teaching, but it has to also be a leadership process as well, where we're actually developing culturally responsive teachers. We're creating an inclusive environment. We are insisting that everyone has an opportunity and to be successful, and we're making sure our curriculum and adopting curriculum and actually adopting budgets that's going to meet the needs of our various student populations. Also, what it means to practice equity for boards? What does that look like in practice? Because they're not the management part, that's the school, that's the superintendent and administration. They make sure the district runs well. They're the governance part. So what does that actually mean? So our workshops also talk about how to practice equity for boards. And then, of course, last but not least is also that policy development piece. So we kind of going a little bit full circle. For board directors to develop policies with an equity lens, you have to go through some type of training.
Yes.
Because what we've seen is districts who've developed policies first, for an example, developing an educational equity policy first, or an anti-racism policy first, and they have not done that community work of working with the district, of understanding the needs of students, of defining equity, of professional development for themselves and for the staff. It's going to be really really, really, really hard to make sure that policy is going to be effective. And also, you won't build capacity for that policy because you have not done that groundwork with working with the community about what equity
putting
is.
the cart before the horse a little bit. Right?
Absolutely, and we want to make sure this is successful. So policy, I think, is extremely important, but you have to do work in order to make sure that policy is going to be effective. Because again, we're really retooling the narrative of district of exclusion to inclusion. And what does that mean? That means a lot of heavy lifting at the bottom end to build that foundation so that that policy holds everybody accountable. You can't be held accountable to something you don't know.
Right, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Heather Bennett, Director of Equity Services at Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alex Lopez with Issues in Education. Appreciate you. Thank you so much.